There are some history books that tell you what happened in the past. Welcome to Book Labyrinth, where we unravel the stories behind the pages. And then there are the ones that make you look at the world around you and think, wait, so this is where it came from. These are 3 history books that did exactly that for me. They cover completely different subjects: women's health, conspiracy theories, and the fight for freedom. But they all have something in common. They show that some of the problems we think are uniquely modern actually have very long histories. And once you understand where they came from, the world today starts to make a little more sense. Let's start with the one I probably recommend the most. Unwell Women by Eleanor Cleghorn. This book explores the history of how women have been understood, treated, and often misunderstood by medicine, from ancient Greece all the way to the present day. And honestly, some of the things in this book are difficult to believe. For centuries, women's physical and mental health problems were dismissed, misunderstood, or blamed on their bodies simply being female. Women were often described as hysterical, overly emotional, or even imagining their symptoms. And the consequences of those beliefs were serious. Medical procedures were performed on women without fully understanding their conditions. Diseases and symptoms specific to women were often poorly studied, and conditions like postpartum depression were misunderstood or ignored. What makes this book especially powerful, though, is that it doesn't feel like a history lesson that belongs entirely in the past. It makes you think about how often women today still walk into a doctor's office feeling like they have to prove that something is wrong with them. That's why I love this book so much. It doesn't just tell you that medical bias existed. It shows you how that bias developed, how deeply it became embedded in medicine, and why some of it is still difficult to get rid of. It's dense. It can be uncomfortable. And there were definitely moments when I had to put it down for a while. But I think everyone should read it. Because sometimes history isn't really about the past. Sometimes it explains why the present still feels the way it does. And that idea brings me to the second book, Someone is Out to Get Us by Brian T. Brown. If you've ever wondered why conspiracy theories seem to spread so easily, especially during moments of political or social uncertainty, this book takes you much further back than the internet. It explores the cultural history of conspiracy in the United States, from the Cold War and Watergate to UFOs and modern misinformation. And what I found really interesting is that the book isn't simply asking, why do people believe crazy things? It asks a much more interesting question. What happens to a society when people stop trusting the institutions, media, and people around them? Because conspiracy theories don't appear out of nowhere. They often grow in environments filled with fear, uncertainty, political tension, and distrust. And once you understand that, misinformation starts to look a little different. The book also looks at the role of media, how certain narratives can amplify fear, create suspicion, and make people more receptive to conspiracy. And honestly, that makes this book feel incredibly relevant right now. Because we live in a world where information is everywhere. But more information doesn't necessarily mean more understanding. Sometimes it just means more opportunities to become afraid, confused, or convinced that someone is secretly responsible for everything going wrong. What I really liked about this book is that it gives you the historical context behind that phenomenon. It makes you realize that conspiracy culture isn't simply an internet problem. It has roots that go back decades. And then there's the third book, which takes us even further into the question of freedom, power, and who gets to have a voice. Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom by David W. Blight. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in 1818. He was separated from his family, denied basic rights, and denied access to formal education. But he secretly taught himself to read and write. And for Douglass, literacy became much more than education. It became a path to freedom. Eventually, he escaped slavery and became one of the most influential abolitionists, writers, and public speakers of his time. But what makes his story so powerful is that he didn't simply fight against slavery. He became a powerful voice for civil rights, political equality, and even women's rights. This biography is incredibly detailed. It follows Douglass from his childhood and enslavement through his escape, his transformation into an abolitionist, and his decades-long fight for justice. And the more you learn about his life, the more impressive his determination becomes. Because Douglass understood something incredibly powerful. If people can control who gets access to education, information, and political power, they can also control who gets to shape society. And that connects this book back to the other two in a way I didn't expect. Unwell Women shows what happens when an entire group of people is ignored by an institution. Someone is out to get us shows what happens when people lose trust in institutions and start searching for alternative explanations. And Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, shows what can happen when someone who has been denied a voice learns how to use that voice to challenge an entire system. 3 completely different books. 3 completely different moments in history. But all 3 made me think about the same thing. Who gets believed? Who gets heard? And who gets to decide what the truth is? That's probably why I love history books like these. They don't just tell you what happened hundreds of years ago. They give you a different lens for understanding what is happening right now. And if you're looking for history books that are more than just dates, names, and wars, I would absolutely start with these 3. They're heavy, they're sometimes uncomfortable, but they might change the way you look at the world around you. If there's a book you'd like me to review, just drop the title in the comments. Need the ebook? Message me on Telegram. And if this video was useful to you, a small coffee donation goes a long way in keeping this channel going.